Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. John Herding here with Aleks Salkin. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great. And I got to give you props for pronouncing my last name correctly because it's not difficult to pronounce, but it's like I usually hear Salkin or Solkin, which is close. I'm not like
Yeah.
offended, but you got it perfect. Solkin is amazing.
Oh, it's just like I get herding, hurtnig, hoarding. I get all kinds of stuff. So I completely understand your, you know, the struggle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
to me, when it comes to your last name, that's just negligence. Because the first thing I thought, I was like, it's got to be hurting. I mean, and by the way, that's the perfect last name if you're a physical therapist, like
Oh yeah.
hurting, see hurting. To me, I mean, that's just like it writes itself.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
you've
I've
already
heard
done
I've
that.
heard all of that too. It's like,
Yeah.
if you're hurting, see Dr. Herding, the whole gamut, right?
Yeah. See hurting to
Um,
stop hurting. How about that?
There you go. But then you run into the struggle. You never want your name attached to a business. That was some
True. Yeah.
advice that I got from a mentor a long time ago. And I'm sure like people, your business is based around your name, but if you try to get away from that a little bit and people are requesting you, and it just becomes a whole thing. So
Sure.
for those of you out there starting a business, that was some mentorship advice I got years ago of, you know, don't put a business in your name. Or
Wish I
don't
would have thought of that because that's definitely my business is definitely in my name too. Might have to rethink that.
Well, it just depends on your goals, right? It's like, are you looking to scale? Like, what are the goals of your business? And
Sure.
sometimes if it's associated with your name, it's difficult to scale because everybody wants to see you.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that is very true.
But anyway, you were on the Fitness Field Off Your podcast. I was connected to you through Mr. Sam Sidkar at Dragon Gym. They do great things. Sam's been on the podcast. You were teaching kettlebells there. You're an SFG level 2. I'll let
Hmm.
you kind of get into your more of your expertise and what you're currently doing. But he recommended you because you're doing some great things in the world of kettlebells. I love kettlebells. He's a man that when he speaks, I listen, right? As I'm
Oh
sure
yeah.
you know.
Yes.
So Alex, why don't you talk about how you came to the Philadelphia area, the things you were doing when you were in the area, and now you've moved away from the area, but you're still able to serve the population of Philadelphia through the way that you've kind of set up your business. Now we'll come full circle into the business talk, but can you kind of give me the background of how you came to be where you are? Because I'm just really interested to hear your story about what you're doing in person, what you're doing online now, and the great things that you're doing in both of those realms.
Should I start with like the whole background story, or should I stick, you think, primarily to, let's say, the stuff as it pertains to Philly in particular? Because it will end up being there's going to be a little bit of background no matter what, because it is an interesting story about
Yeah,
how I got there. But maybe we'll
let's
stick with that because that'll be a little shorter.
works for me. Yeah, whatever gives people a little bit of insight into who you are, how you came to be who you are, and how that impacts the service you're now providing as a fitness professional.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. And you and I were talking just a little bit before the podcast began about where I'm living now, because I'm obviously not in the Philly area anymore. I am in Omaha, Nebraska. And usually when people hear that, they're like, where is Nebraska? Like people just forget, that it's even a US state. It's like one of the most forgettable of all states, unfortunately. But I was born and raised here, and I'm giving you the as I would say, like the really, really short version, and lived then in Israel for 4.5 years, where I was teaching, and I also did a lot of workshops in Europe, Australia, the US, and I was using that kind of as my base.
Like
And then
kettlebell workshops? Sorry.
some were kettlebell, a lot of them were calisthenics workshops,
Okay.
actually, and then also workshops for original strength. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with original
I
strength.
love original strength. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, then you'll like this then, because I was one of the first original strength instructors. Uh,
So I've probably seen videos of you all over the place. I used to follow original
it is very, very
way
possible
back.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, I actually, so I'll give you just another little like peek into the origin story part of things. I got into original strength before it was called original strength. It was still being called Becoming Bulletproof at the time, and so this is about 2011. I bought an ebook that Tim Anderson and Mike McNiff wrote, and was really intrigued by it. And then 2012, I attended the second ever Becoming Bulletproof workshop with Tim Anderson and Jeff Newport, who's now at the time he was a master SFG instructor, one of very, very few. And he's since retired, but he still, has a kettlebell business online and everything like that. And then kind of toward the tail end of 2013, I was living in Israel. I got an email from Tim and Jeff asking if I would come and be a part of the first hand-picked crop of original strength instructors.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was a very cool experience. I flew to New York in January of 2014. I went through this kind of like intense, very, very compacted course. They've since expanded it and they've since grown it. But yeah, I was one of the first original strength instructors. And so one of the things that I have been doing in particular has been working on getting like an ecosystem of kettlebells, calisthenics, and then original strength, as well as other complementary things, so that it acts as a full system to help people get stronger, fitter, and healthier in the time that they have, using reasonable workouts that get radical results. And I ended up in the Philadelphia area. I lived briefly in Westchester and then in Downingtown. So anybody who's familiar with the Paoli-Thorndale line, at the very least, has heard of those, if you've ever been on that train. And I've known Sam for many years, and I'm very good friends with Pat Flynn, who was also a resident of the suburbs of Philly. And I used to, every time I would come back to the US from Israel, I would always stop first and hang out with Pat. And so he and I would hang out for maybe a couple days to a week. Then I would come back to Omaha to visit my family. And so it was kind of like a routine sort of a thing. And then I had plans actually to leave Israel to move to a different location, and they sort of fell through. And Pat was like, well, hey, why don't you come to Westchester? And Sam, I'm sure, would love to have you at the Dragon Gym. And so that's how it was. We decided I was going to work there. And so I taught some kettlebell classes there, and I also did private lessons with people, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, as Sam's got in addition to being truly a master of Taekwondo, he's also freaky strong, moves exceptionally well. And he runs an incredible gym. So it was a very special experience. The people there are very uniquely dedicated, and I was happy to help them, move them a little bit further along in their strength and movement goals.
Perfect. Yeah. So tell me about, now you've transitioned back, life's brought you back the path to Nebraska where you grew up. And you've transitioned your business from when you were in Philly for a little bit. You were doing some personal training, you were doing some of the class stuff, but now you've transitioned to all completely online. And I think it's great. It's when I remember becoming Bulletproof, and I remember Original Strength, and out of all of the seminars I've taken, that was one that was on the list that I never actually got around to. So it's really cool to make that connection with you. And I'm sure with the stuff Tim's put out, I've seen you in the videos and all of that, because it kind of to me, it just kind of fell by the wayside. But I'm curious now, you've transitioned to the all online fitness space, and how that's impacted how you're able to serve people, what you're able to provide. And then if you could speak to how you've been able to change lives through that and get results through that, I think that's great, because I think people are really interested in, sometimes they're used to fitness being in person. They're used to taking the class. They're used to the personal training, but now you had your trainers getting into the online space before COVID. Now I think COVID kind of, really propelled that and pushed that into trainers making a career out of being online. So if you could speak to now how you've transitioned to being able to serve people all over the world through online training, and how that's impacted results and who you're able to serve, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I actually started the online portion of my business in 2016, believe it or not. And again, at the behest of my friend Pat Flynn, who had been gently and repeatedly needling me over the course of a few years. He's like, you should really start an email list. You should start, doing some online stuff. And, eventually a friend of mine once told me that my ears have a 2-year wait period or something like that. Cause it's or make a suggestion, and within 2 years, usually toward the tail end of 2 years, I'll end up taking the suggestion seriously. So I started it officially in 2016, in June of
Mhm.
2016. And so I would start doing emails a couple of times a week to people, and I ended up, making a an online newsletter, like a monthly paid newsletter. And that eventually expanded into more information products. And, when I was living in the Philly area, I still had the online portion of my business, and then I also had the in-person side. And when I moved back to Omaha, just by default, it ended up being all online because at 2020, I had plans to do workshops in Czech Republic, Spain, England. I was going to try to, fit in some other places as well. And I don't need to tell you what happened. We ended up
Mhm.
becoming an impossibility. But because I had those things, I had been working on those things. I thought, and I wanted to get a job at a gym locally, because not because I really needed the money, because I knew that I could support myself just with the online business, but because I like teaching people in person. Like,
Mhm.
there are some serious advantages that you get to teaching people in person, that can be replicated online, but they're a little more challenging to replicate. And ultimately, I decided I wasn't going to do it because I thought, well, they're going to want me to be there at certain hours, and I'm going to just every 6 or 8 weeks, I'm going to be like, yeah, I got to go away for like 2 weeks. So find someone to cover my shift. I knew they were going to be like, no, you find somebody to cover your shifts for the next 2 weeks. So I
Right.
was like, rather than deal with that, I'll just make everything online, because I think that's going to be a little bit more conducive to what I want to do. And it turned out to be a fortuitous decision because, as soon as COVID hit and all the restrictions started being placed on us, Omaha in particular didn't seem to have as much of like shutdown, I would say, as other places did. But one thing they did have was at the gym that I was working out at, just for myself personally. I was going through a program that a friend of mine put on, and because it was a studio, we were allowed to stay open. I think the larger gyms weren't able to. So what I would have done was I would have gotten a job at a larger gym, and I just skipped it. So
Mhm.
what ended up happening is, even though I had offerings in the past to do online coaching with me, a big portion of my business was more like information products. And but in 2020, the long distance, like calls, like what we're doing, ended up becoming something that people were much more interested in. So I had a couple different offerings. Obviously, one of them was much more intensive one-on-one coaching with me, which would have me doing a lot more of the driving, let's say. And then I
Mhm.
decided, well, I'm going to also introduce consultations, where I'm more like the navigator, kind of telling them what they should do. And I'll take a look at movements that they're doing to make sure that they're doing them safely. But it'll be a little bit more hands off. And I think a lot of people think of that sort of a thing as like you pointed out earlier, uh, they can't really necessarily see fitness as being anything other than in person. And my perspective of it for a very long time was always the opposite. And it was that uh, ultimately I don't want people to have to rely on me to be fit. Like, if they want to continue to work with me because they like the direction I'm taking them, that's great. But
Mhm.
ultimately, I want people to be like, I've learned enough. I now have a good enough understanding of how to move. So I can come back to you for, more coaching or more consulting or something like that in the future. But I don't feel like, if I don't know, let's say I won the lottery and I won
Mhm.
$30 million or something, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Side note, I don't think I would do that, because I really love what I'm doing, and I think sitting on the beach wasting away in Margaritaville would just be a really boring life for me. So
Yeah.
but let's just say that happened. I wouldn't want these people to be like, well, now my umbilical cord has been, removed, and I have no clue what I'm going to do. So it seemed like a good idea to start introducing consulting, because I think a lot of people, particularly people who are interested in kettlebells and calisthenics, one of the big selling points of both of them is that they're very convenient. Now, incidentally, I think the most important parts of kettlebell and bodyweight training are not just that they're very convenient, but that they're highly, highly effective.
Mhm.
But the fact remains the same, is that most people are like, I can do this at home, so I can cut down on commute time and all this other stuff. So what ended up happening, and this is again where I was fortunate that I had people who were interested in wanting to test this out, is that I would take a look at what they were doing, give them pointers on the direction they were going in general, and they would make the notes. They would have an idea of where they were going, and then I would get some updates from them periodically, like, hey, this worked awesome. What's next? But the key to that is because, like you pointed out, a lot of people are very interested, or a lot of trainers now are very interested in the online side of things. I think there's a misunderstanding that some have that, oh, well, this is just, way more convenient, or it's almost like passive income, and it's really not. It's every bit as much work, if not more. And this is not to keep people away from it. I think people should do it, especially if you have some really good gifts in teaching. But the thing is that because you can't provide any tactile feedback, you can't like physically adjust them. Like, okay, let's pull your shoulders back here a little bit more. Let's make sure you're keeping your abs tight, and you give them the kind of the gentle love tap on the midsection. You have to be much better with your words and with the cues that you're giving and the visualizations that you try to instill within them, so that they can produce these movements correctly. So there's a lot more mental engagement, I think, when you're doing things with people remotely, let's say, as opposed to face to face. And then what I would also say is that if you do want to train people remotely, it doesn't have to be, at least initially, it shouldn't be exclusively. I think it should be kind of half and half, because I think you need that in-person experience and the ability to, help, again, sometimes actually provide tactile feedback to your students. Because if you can't do that in person, it's going to be very difficult to do that online. We might think of this from let's say, a strength training perspective for people who are familiar with the movements. If somebody wants to do a kettlebell snatch, they're going to have to be able to do a good high pull before that, and a good clean before that high pull, and a good swing before the clean, and a good deadlift before the swing. So you need, and it's very similar with your training. If we'll look at like the deadlift and the swing as an example, as being sort of analogous to training people in person. You've got to really have that down first before you can adequately make those leaps into being partially online into fully online and remote with people. But so the one thing that I would caution new and enthusiastic trainers away from doing is saying, I'm just going to start off completely online. I think you're going to find that to be like trying to learn the snatch without learning how to do all those other fundamental movements first.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that. I think it seemed from the outwardly, it seems like it's the thing to do. Like, I can only work this amount of hours, like I have freedom of time and I can work from anywhere and this, but I do think there's a huge value into getting the reps underneath you, coaching in person, even having like the high volume days where you're having 12, 13, 14, 15-hour days back to back to back to back to back, seeing how people respond to exercises in person, seeing how people respond to external cues, internal cues, because if you're trying to go online, you're eliminating, you're missing out on all of those kind of precursors and foundational things that you need as a new trainer that we've all kind of been through, that you're just not going to provide the service that you should online. And I think, and in talking to people in similar situations, like online training is a ton of work. It's not less work. It's not, I can train 100 people in 10 hours a week because I'm just tweaking a program here and there. It's like, how are you upkeeping the customer service? How are you upkeeping and making sure they're progressing the right way, and making sure they're sending you videos and you can tweet? Like, it is a lot more. And but I do think certain ways of thinking do fit into it. Where you have to be very organized, you have to be very deliberate about the things that you're doing. You can't be scatterbrained, but I would completely agree with you where you need to get the reps of in-person under your belt before you make a transition to completely online. And I think it's years of doing that versus like, I just graduated, I'm gonna go 6 months just to get a couple reps under my belt, and then I'm gonna go online.
Couldn't agree more. And I would say, if you're ambitious, again, you can try to fit some stuff in online so that you can maybe work on improving, like, okay, here are the things that I'm going to need. Meaning, if you want to use that as a means of trying to help you improve your in-person abilities, because you're like, okay, I see that when the person is on their own, and I didn't tell them, make sure that you're wearing this, make sure that you have this equipment, make sure that you've got that, you start to see where your own gaps are. So you could theoretically do that, but nevertheless, I think you just don't know what you don't know. And so if
Yeah.
you don't spend enough time training people in person, it's going to be hard to do the transition online. And you're undoubtedly going to see people doing it anyway. But I think what you're also going to see over the long run, I think over the next, let's say 10 years or so, the trend that we'll probably be able to see is that the people who are best in person are the ones who provide the best online service. Whereas the ones who, they're just still wet behind the ears, just got their NASM certification or ISSA or whatever, and then they immediately go online. I don't think it'll be as consistent. It's not impossible, I don't think, but I do think that it's going to be a lot less consistent.
I almost think it's like the CrossFit craze, right? I love CrossFit, have a ton of friends that own gyms, but I almost think that when CrossFit first came out, it was like it was this low barrier of entry gym.
Yeah.
So everybody was hopping on opening a gym, but now you've seen like the better ones have kind of weeded themselves out. They're doing great stuff, but some of the trainers that just hopped on the trends to try to make a quick buck and they weren't ready to own a gym or they weren't ready to teach a snatch, or some of the Olympic lifts, like those gyms kind of have weeded themselves out and now the cream has risen to the top. I almost think maybe this follows the same trend. Like everybody's trying to get online, but like you said, the better trainers who have the experience coaching in person will end up rising to the top because they've seen movement and tweaked movement. They've seen how people responded varying programming techniques, more so, and they'll rise to the top because they get better results. People aren't getting hurt. People are more happy with the service that is being provided.
Yeah, it really starts with everything's got to be internal. You've still got to do the work first. You've got to make sure that the service that you're providing is paramount. And I'm sure too that you're going to see people saying, online coaching is ruining personal training because look at all these fools doing it wrong. Well, I don't really think it's the case. I think that what you pointed out, for instance, with CrossFit is a great example because the idea behind CrossFit is great. I don't think it's usually executed very well because like you pointed out, it's a low barrier of entry. I think that to some degree, there's kind of this idea, even their idea of scaling, like, a person can't do a barbell snatch yet, so we'll do it with a PVC pipe. Well, maybe they don't need to be doing that anyway. Maybe you need to know just as a trainer, what would be something that's a more productive use of their time that might be working them in the right direction as opposed to, doing overhead squats with a PVC pipe, which might be not only irrelevant, but frustrating, for the person. So I think, and CrossFit hasn't gone away as a result of these problems. It's still every bit as popular as it ever was. But like you pointed out, the people who are really good at it and who use the CrossFit name to get people in and then use their own intelligence and their own coaching acumen to make a great community and get great results, those people are always going to stand out. I agree 100%.
Perfect. So tell me about how this has impacted who you serve. Like, who are you serving? Why are people coming and how are they finding you? And what makes you difference that helps you stand out from the crowd of online trainers?
This is a very, very good question. And I think it's in particular important because if you think that everybody is your client, and the reality is nobody is really your client, you have nothing in particular that makes you stand out. And primarily the people who train with me it's majority men, but I do have female clients and those who buy and do my information products. I have like courses, programs, challenges, guides, things like that. Again, it mostly skews toward men who are in their, I would say, late 30s to early to mid 50s. Most of whom have professional jobs. They work in offices for the most part. And those are my primary crowd. And this is, we'll say, like the demographic information. The psychographic information would be they want, like anybody, they want to look better naked for sure, but they also want to have strength that they never had when they were younger. They want the now needlessly complicated process of getting stronger to be made simplified and more direct. And they want to do it at home. They don't want to go to a gym. They don't want to, they don't want the commute. They don't want all the complications. And they like kettlebells, calisthenics, and movement. So this is this is a pretty specific niche, because if you fall outside of that and you're like, oh, but I like barbell and dumbbell training, then I'm not the guy for you. And it doesn't mean I don't like barbell and dumbbell training. I think it's great. It's just not really my area of expertise. I don't pretend that it is. Likewise with fat loss, I know a thing or two about fat loss and a thing or two about nutrition, but because it's not what I do, if somebody comes to me and they say like, I want to lose fat, I always send them somewhere else. I say, I just really, I don't know enough about it to coach. I know enough about it to know the information behind it. I don't know enough to properly coach you, and I wouldn't feel right saying that I do. So I recommend you follow so-and-so, or that you speak with so-and-so about that sort of a thing. So again, if people are, we'll say in their 30s to 50s and beyond, I do have people who are beyond that, like kettlebell calisthenics and natural movement training, like to train at home, want to get strong specifically, and want to get resilient and physically confident. And those are the people that I serve primarily. And that in particular has been very helpful, because it helps with my messaging. Because even if I might have, kettlebells are used by athletes, they're used by Grandma Betty, they're used by a lot of different people, but how you organize your message to put it out into the world is of paramount importance. Because if you're trying to aim toward the Grandma Betty market, but everything you're talking about is athletes market, you're going to have you're not going to have a message to market match. And so what you're going to end up with is maybe you're going to attract people, but then they're going to be like, oh, I'm like a 20-year-old super stud athlete, and this program is like way too trimmed down for me. I'm going to go somewhere else. You don't want to attract the wrong people and then disappoint them. You want to attract the right people and then just dazzle them with the stuff that you do. So understanding who your market is, which may change over time, you don't have to know right off the bat, but understanding who is most interested in your product and who's buying it the most, whether that's a product like an information product, or a book, or if it's a service, that sort of a thing is huge.
Yeah. So when people are looking to train with you, do you recommend typically that they're starting with one of your info products and then working up to consulting with you, or consulting with you first and trying a product, or does it just depend on the person and the mix of what they're looking for?
It definitely depends. So there are people, I would say there's no right way to do this, by the way, because there are people who are, in fact, I was listening to a podcast recently of a guy who's in the software niche. And what he said with a previous company of his, was an SEO company. This is many years ago. He said he would make sure that the people who wanted to work with him, he would say, okay, first you have to buy this product. And it was like a $700 course or something. And only after that, can we work as client and customer and whatever. And I'll, and incidentally, he said, okay, I'll take this off of like the first month's worth of the coaching that I give you, but you have to do this first, because this is going to make everything easier for you and for me. For me, it's a little different, because there are people who there are some people who do not want to get coaching with me. And this is one thing I found actually very early on, is there are people who would just rather kind of do it on their own, follow the directions, get the results, and they're happy with that. And then there are other people who are like, I want something that's really, really specific to me, and I have very specific goal, and I want to work with you specifically. So yeah, I don't require anybody. The only thing I do require is that they get my 9-minute challenge first, which is if you go to 9minutechallenge.com, which is the number 9, not the word 9, 9minutechallenge.com, you can get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. And it's a good primer overall to my approach to training. And again, it's really a very small microcosm. It's not jam-packed full of stuff. The whole idea behind it, for instance, is that you learn how to make movement kind of your paramount focus. And I'm sure that in your practice as a physical therapist, you probably see a lot of people who want to get stronger, improve their performance, but they have movement issues. And I see the exact same thing. And so I kind of show them, here's a way that you can train that's going to improve the way you move and get you stronger. And you can do it in conjunction with whatever else it is that you're already doing. So you don't have to put your regular workouts to the side. This is like a complementary thing. It's like putting not like a NOS thing in your car. I don't know a lot about cars, so if this is a bad analogy, folks, just work with me here. But but it's like putting a NOS booster in your car. You're not changing the entire engine. You're simply adding this boost of nitrous oxide, and now you can go faster. Just as an example. So Yeah, I would say it really depends on how your business is set up. So for me, it wouldn't make sense to say, well, you have to get this for, in some cases, actually it might, but I never really require that sort of a thing.
Mhm.
Because if somebody's like, I want to learn kettlebells from the ground up, or I want to prepare for SFG II. I've had people on both, both sides of things. And in both cases, there might have been instances where it would have been better for them to just get one of my info products, and I'll tell them so. Otherwise, it might be better for them to work with me one-on-one or just do periodic consultations. And so this is one thing it's helpful, is to have multiple different options. You don't need a huge smorgasbord, but let's say for online coaching, I have like 3 major options. One is just kind of the navigation thing where I'm like, okay, here's the map. Here's what you need to do. Here's where you need to go. And then, on the complete opposite end, it's like, I'm going to not only draw out this special map for you, but we're going to work together very, very closely, almost daily, to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. And then I've also got the information products where it's like, if you have this general goal, or you find you have this specific frustration that you just can't get over, you try this on your own, and this will very likely help you to get where you're going. So you're going to find that there are people who do not want to get on a Zoom call, but they want to get fit. Or they don't want a hyper specialized program just for them. They want something that's going to get them, generally stronger, fitter, healthier, better looking, and that sort of a thing. And over time, depending on how you as a trainer or how you operate, that might be the direction you go. Like, for instance, it was over a period of time that I developed all this. I didn't just go, okay, in 2016, I'm going to start my online business. Now I have these 10 different things that I offer. It's like, it's taken time, it's built up, but you start with at least one thing that you would like to offer, whether it's a product or a service, and then you go from there. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. So are you doing, and this speaks to maybe some of the professionals listening to the call, are you doing a lot of SFG prep training? Like if someone comes to you, wants the certification, traditionally for any clients that might be listening, SFG StrongFirst is one of the premier fitness or kettlebell specific certifications, because there's a huge physical component to it, and it's really precise in excuse me, how the instructors teach the movements to the potential SFG candidates. So it's actually, and maybe you can speak to it, it's regarded as one of the premier kettlebell certifications, and probably one of the premier fitness certifications, because of the attention to detail, the physical components. So a lot of times people going through the certification will hire trainers in order to prep them for the exam. Right.
Yeah. And I would say, if you do want to go through SFG, definitely hire somebody, because if you try to do it on your own, you will very likely end up within that 25 to 30% failure rate that the average certification has, the average SFG certification. Like you pointed out, it's very, very physical. And yeah, I've trained a number of people for SFG and SFG II, specifically online. And it is definitely possible. It's doable. Depends on the student. Obviously, you need a student who is, if you've got somebody who can't even swing a bell and they want to do a cert next month, that's kind of out of the question. But otherwise, yeah, I've helped a number of people successfully prepare. And so it's not the primary, like most people who work with me online are not preparing for SFG, but I'm using, on a regular basis, I use the principles that are in StrongFirst for kettlebell training. Not exclusively, there are other things that I'll do with them too. But yeah, most of the people are training just for themselves. They want to get better. They have a passion for strength training. They have a regular job, or they own a company or something like that, but they really like getting strong. They like getting fit. They love lifting kettlebells. They love doing, various calisthenics exercises. They like to move and feel younger. And, like I said earlier, build the strength maybe they never even had when they were young, because we just didn't have all this information at our fingertips. So yeah, that's, I would say, a small portion of the online coaching and consulting that I do. The larger part would be enthusiasts who want that, let's say, the SFG experience, but they don't really have the goal of becoming an instructor.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I spoke to it being a certification for fitness professionals, but very often too, I think you'll see someone with they don't want to get into coaching, but they still want to do it as the a goal of training and the physicality of the certification, just to say that they made it through into this like almost brotherhood of being able to meet these metrics of physical testing your physical strength and prowess and all of that.
That
It's
was
really
how I
cool
started,
community.
actually, because when I got back then it was called RKC. They've since undergone a brand change, but it's the same guy. It's Pavel, who you may have seen. For those of you who've heard of kettlebells, maybe you've heard of, you vaguely understand that there are certifications. Pavel was the guy he was a former Spetsnaz physical training instructor, and Spetsnaz is like Navy SEALs in former Soviet Union. And he came to the U.S. in, I think, the mid to late 90s, kind of the mid 90s, if I recall correctly. And then by the late 90s, he was writing books about flexibility training, joint mobility, strength training, and then he eventually wrote one about kettlebell training after being goaded by one of his powerlifting friends to write about it. And a lot of the information that he provided was stuff that essentially was lost to the West in everything other than very specific circles, let's say. And so he started the first ever certification, and he's since become a subject matter expert to the U.S. Marines. And he was featured on Joe Rogan's podcast a few years ago. So that's the guy who I did the certification from. He was actually teaching my certification. And I, at the time, this always surprises people, but my goal was to be a linguist. That was my career path. And I was still going through my bachelor's degree at the time. And I did it mostly as a personal challenge to myself to go through the RKC. And then it wasn't until I finished my bachelor's degree, I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. And, I ended up getting some requests unsolicited from people who wanted me to train them because I had a profile on RKC's website. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll start doing some in-home training, and I'll do this just kind of on the side. But I really liked it, and I wanted to continue to do it. And so for some people, that's the path they go through. Other people, maybe they might teach a class or two on the weekend, and they keep their main job and what have you. So there are a lot of reasons why people would become a trainer, but many of them don't go and become full-time trainers because it's something that, again, there's a unique characteristic about the kettlebell that just makes it so exciting for people, because there's just this raw physicality to it that I think in some ways is hard to get the sense of with like a barbell, because ballistic barbell movements like clean and the snatch are just much farther removed than what most people are going to be able to safely do. Whereas you can do that sort of a thing with a kettlebell and get many of the same benefits to at least some degree or another. And that excites people. And for that, many people like to go specifically just for the personal challenge that it gives to them, even if they don't go on to become an instructor. So for those of you out there who are listening and thinking about that, feel free, go, do the personal challenge. You don't have to become, a full-time instructor, but it really will change you. It's a cool experience.
Yeah. So that being said, like that kind of flows nicely into what's your main motivation now? Like what, you experience this world, you change career paths, and now what keeps you motivated as you're continuing to build your business and serve your clients and create new programs? What's your main motivation at this point?
When I grew up, and this always surprises people too, because I think most people think you get into personal training because you were a stud when you were younger and you were athletic and you were just a natural. And so now you want to turn your hobby or whatever you were preternaturally good at into a career path. And it's not always the best approach, because I think a lot of people who didn't struggle can't really understand people who are struggling. In fact, I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I don't offer like fat loss programs is because even though I understand the basics of fat loss, I've never been fat. I've never had a weight problem. I've never had a bad relationship with food. And it would take a lot of time and effort on my part to learn how to guide people like that. And it's just not something that I think I could provide better than other people. When I was young, I was scrawny, unathletic, uncoordinated, weak, goofy, everything. And I know what it's like to be in, let's say, a high school gym class where you're partnered up in for weight training that you do once or twice a week, and you're being told okay, we're doing the bench press today, and your partner's got 2 plates on each side, and this is like a 17-year-old kid, and here you are, 16 or 17, and they gotta they're getting more work pulling the plates off the bar just so that they can put the smaller ones on for you, and then you still still struggle with. In fact, I remember this was junior year. I had a guy he was on the football team. I don't know what his position was, but he was like big athletic, like natural athlete guy, and he was my training partner. And we had this big scary gym teacher who could like bench 365 for reps, just like barrel chested, massive guy named Coach Chavez. And I remember, Aaron, who's my training partner, strips the plates off the bar for me for the bench press. And there was so little on the bar, I think he didn't even feel that he had to spot me. So he went and turned around and he was talking to one of his friends, and I got like pinned, and I had the presence of mind to roll it down to my hips and then move it over to the floor. And Mr. Chavez saw this, and he didn't yell at me. He was like, Aaron, like screamed at him, and like everybody went silent, looked over at us. He's like, you're supposed to be spotting him. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And Aaron's face got beet red, and he mumbled something under his breath. And I really felt like, even though Aaron felt like the attention was on him, fact is, everybody could see that there was very little weight on the bar for me. And it was like, I don't know how much it was. It must have been like a equivalent of a broomstick with a bagel on each end. It really was not a lot of weight. So I know what it's like to be, to just not get it, to be not a natural at all. And it was in 2006, for instance, that I discovered Muay Thai. A friend of mine and I watched this movie called Ong Bak, the Thai warrior. This guy named Tony Jaa, and we just loved it. We found out that in Omaha there was a Muay Thai gym, and now it's not that uncommon. But back then, UFC was still, it wasn't really well known. It was not the cultural phenomenon that it is now, and it just so happens there's a 2-time kickboxing world champion who specializes in Muay Thai, who lives in Omaha. And so we went to his gym and started training there. And I sucked big time, but I really liked it. I had a lot of fun. I started weightlifting in earnest. And I'm using the weightlifting in the quotidian terms. I don't mean like Olympic weightlifting, but like lifting weights.
Yeah.
As my friend Trevor was showing me, here are these bodybuilding kind of movements. And so I found that I didn't completely connect with it, but I liked it better than not doing it. And then eventually I got into Krav Maga. And then finally, a friend of mine introduced me to the kettlebell. And this was in 2008. And I finally started to feel like I was making some progress. I hired a coach to help me to refine my technique. And slowly but surely, I really started to learn more and more. And then I got to the point where I got my certification. And when I first tried, one of the things they focus on in the SFG cert is how to teach other people. But you find out too that teaching in a kind of a sterile environment where you're teaching mostly your friends and colleagues in the certification versus somebody who has maybe been sedentary their whole life, or they've only done stuff like running, or maybe some group fitness classes where there was no focus whatsoever on how to move properly, the mind-muscle connection, how to use movement patterns to orient your training. There's a huge gulf between what people want to accomplish and the skills that they have in order to do it. And so my big motivation is trying to bridge that gap. I realize that basically their goals are going to be far off from where they are no matter what. And so I can't bring their goals closer to them. What I can do is I can give them the tools and the understanding of how to build that bridge from that distant point that they want to go to, and starting with where they are right now. And so my goal more than anything is to demystify the process of getting strong. It is really very simple, but there are considerations that most people don't think much about. A lot of people in particular, I think, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is that they're like, I want to get fit. So what supplements should I take? What workout should I do? Like give me like a workout that's going to get me fit. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, they're starting with like the tip of the pyramid. And what you need to do is you need to get them to understand the base, which is the principles, the foundational stuff. And then like, okay, now what exact goal do you want? Do you want to do 10 pull-ups? Do you want to add a bit of muscle? Do you want to, get away from being achy and stiff all the time? You got to figure that out. And then you can take that pyramid and you can point it in a particular direction. And that's going to tell you what you do with the tip here, which is the details, like the sets and the reps and the exact exercises you're going to do, and the warm-up routine. So a lot of people try to start with that tip first because they don't know any better. And so my big thing is trying to very simply and quickly show them, okay, here's how you build this foundation so that we can figure out which of these things that you can do that's going to help move you in this direction. And I've found that the number of people who have this disconnect, even people who've spent a good amount of time strength training and, doing exercise and that sort of a thing, are missing those things. And that is what prevents them from getting to where they want to go further. Like, they've already gone a portion of the way, but in order to keep building that bridge, they're going to need to go back in some cases, build up some more skills, and then get back out on the bridge and keep building. So that's my huge motivation, because I know what it's like to spend the first few decades of your life just not getting it and being like, I'm just not a natural. Maybe I'll never be able to do this stuff. To being somebody that people actually look to be like, hey, can you help me with these things? And I've been very privileged to be able to teach people all over the world. I mean, I have students in Europe, throughout the United States, Australia, and people who've bought my info products in even more places, and I get great emails and comments on social media all the time, people raving about like what they can now do, how much better they feel, how much stronger they are. And that really gives me the motivation to want to continue to refine my own processes and continue to expand my influence so that my what I'm doing now can eventually grow to empire-like proportions.
Well, and that's what's awesome. I think we go through these seasons as new trainers where we're trying to be creative. We're sometimes maybe even we're looking at exercise as the main thing, and now stepping back, and as I'm now 20 years into it, it's no, you know what? Like, we need to hit the low-hanging fruit. It's like, are you sleeping? Is your nutrition on point? Are you being consistent getting to the gym? How about before you try any of this other stuff, let's make sure you're getting your 8 hours of sleep. Let's make sure you're eating a little bit better. And let's make sure that you can make the gym a 2 to 3 time a week thing, and just even starting there. Or even, it's not even the gym, it's like the physical activity. Can you make physical activity, just going out for a walk, a regular part of your routine 3 times a week for 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's start thinking about progressing that. Then you can buy the equipment or get the gym membership. And it's just setting up the daily habits and routines of the low-hanging fruit before getting carried away with the stuff we think is going to be the easiest, like the supplements and this and that and the other thing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that helping people to get a better mindset is a huge help to all those things. So when they see sleep and proper nutrition as being essential, and that exercise can't help you outrun or hack these things, but these are things that are essential to you being able to do the things you want to do to accomplish the things that you want. That's huge. And I think even bigger too is that the way that a lot of people set goals is they're like, okay, I can't do a single pull-up right now, but I want to do like a set of 10. Well, you want to go from 0 to 10. That's huge. How about what if you focus on 0 to 1? What would you have to do to go from 0 to 1? Rather than worrying about the sets and reps and this other stuff, and rather than worrying about like what you're going to do 3 months from now, how about like what can you do every day that, like, if somebody said, I'll give you $1,000 if in 3 months you can do 10 pull-ups and you can currently do 0. Now, I'm not saying that people should make it a 3-month goal to do that, but I'm going to give that as an example. What do you think your better option would be? Some things that you could do daily that would make it more likely that you will get to that goal. And I'm not talking crazy workouts. I'm saying something you can show up, punch the clock, and reliably get a good outcome from, versus how can I push myself to the point of, possible visit to Dr. Herding's office in order to move ahead a little bit. And so getting people to understand process goals versus destination goals, I think is paramount. And that change in the mindset can be super helpful for people.
Yeah, it's just consistency is the key, and small manageable steps, not getting ahead of yourself, set, like making sure you'll stay committed to it and not making the goals too daunting. It's bringing people, I think it bring people back down to earth more than anything.
Yes. And so that people know that I do the same thing. I have on my corkboard, you can't see it here, but I've got 2 pieces of paper, just hand-drawn calendars with just, 10 spaces across, 6 down of daily content that I put out. So to bring people into my sphere. So stuff on, Facebook posts, YouTube videos, new articles, stuff like that. And then I also have another one for business reading that I want to do on a daily basis. And it's all like you described, what we might call the low-hanging fruit. But every day I go out and I collect this low-hanging fruit. And next thing you know, I've got a lot to show for it. I've got a lot better understanding of, business and that sort of a thing from reading through the materials that I have. I've reached out to thousands more people than I ever would have been able to otherwise by putting out new content every day. And it's not stuff that takes a long time. It's all very simple to do. But rather than making it this huge, scary, daunting task, it's something that's not scary at all. Something I can do literally every single day of the week. And that's made all the difference, not just for me, but more specifically for the people that I'm trying to reach, the people who want to accomplish great things and need a little bit of a poke in the right direction.
Absolutely. And that's probably that's one of the most important lessons I learned as a business owner, but also on my fitness journey. And, if anybody is taking anything out of today, that's one of the main things I would hope that they do is just be consistent, find what works for you, because consistency is going to be the key, even if it's for 2 minutes a day.
Totally. I mean, think about it like this. You do 2 minutes a day, 60 days in a row, it's 120 minutes. And you're going to get 60 days older anyway. You might as well be stronger when you get there. You don't want to be in the same position or maybe even behind. So that people underestimate how much they can get done in even 5 minutes a day. That's my first thing I tell people. Like, if you can commit yourself to some kind of movement, it doesn't have to be sweat inducing even, but 5 minutes a day, that's going to lay down the routine that makes it very easy to succeed over the long run. Because now it's like as simple as brushing your teeth. You're not going to be like, okay, I'm going to brush the what out of my teeth 1 day a week. I'm just going to crush it. Like nobody builds their dental health like that. It's the exact reverse. You do it a little bit each day, and next thing you know, okay, your teeth are pretty healthy. Your mouth health is doing all right. Same thing goes with everything else.
Absolutely. So what's next for you? What's the next step for Aleks?
Well, that is an excellent question. One of the things that I want to do in the coming year is I want to have more options to work with me doing guided programs. So right now I've got, again, 2 options. It's work directly with me through consulting or coaching. And then I have a variety of info products. And so one of the things that I would like to do is kind of bridge that gap too, so that people can get the info product, but then also have better access to me so that I can guide them through, like people are going to run into speed bumps in their own life. And so I want to have something that is going to allow people to get kind of like a hybrid where it's like they've got the map. They're not working with me directly, but as a part of a group of other people who are all working toward the same goal and creating a stronger community for the people who already follow me. And as I mentioned too, I also want to expand my little country, let's say, that I've created, a little community, into an empire that reaches all over the place. And like I said, I've already got a few ambassadors, i.e. students in other countries around the world. So I would like to continue that and strengthening my business so that it's more efficient at reaching out to the people who are looking for this kind of training: kettlebells, calisthenics, and movement. They like training at home. They like getting stronger so that they can keep up with their kids and grandkids and do cool stuff outside of that. So they're not like the decrepit parents who, have to sit out when their kids are, playing outside, and then set a good example for their kids and the people around them so that they can better lead. The only way to do that is if you are fit enough to do that. So that's my big thing is in the coming year, I want to, and I'm going to make that much more efficient process on my end so that I can not convince people, but identify the people who want to do that, bring them into my sphere, teach them the things they need so that they can disseminate it to the people who matter most to them.
Love it. That's a great mission. So in closing, I didn't tell you this, I'm so sorry, but it's going to make it even more fun.
Cool.
We do a quick rapid fire 5 questions that you're not prepped for. You're not sent ahead of time, just to get a deeper understanding, your subconscious answer to some questions so that people understand who you are a little bit more as a person.
It's like a verbal ink blot test.
Yep. You game?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So what would be your walkout song to you're walking into your first training session of the day, or you're getting hyped to sign onto the computer for your first consultation of the day? What would be your walkout song?
Well, that's a very good question. Man,
you're walking out for a course, you're about to teach a course, you're walking out to...
I would say the John Wick medley by La Castlevania. If you go to YouTube and you put it in, somebody took La Castlevania's songs for the John Wick soundtrack, and then they turned it into like a 10-minute medley. That's what it would be, because it's just like John Wick goes out and he just dominates his opponents. And my job is to crush weakness, not my clients, to crush weakness.
Love it.
And much the same way that John doesn't kill anybody who doesn't deserve it, I only crush weakness and frailness and leave the person not only intact, but actually stronger and better. So that's what I would say.
Love it. What's your favorite exercise?
Pull-ups.
Okay. I was looking for like kettlebell snatch or something from you.
Oh, okay. Well, and on the kettlebell side of things,
or in general.
Yeah, in general, I would definitely say pull-ups, like overall. But on the kettlebell side of things, I like clean and jerks. Okay. Those are amazing.
So I think my all-time favorite exercise is a kettlebell snatch.
Yeah, I love snatch. I'll take this back. I don't love doing snatches. I love what they give to me. That's maybe the better way to describe it.
Yeah. One food for the rest of your life, what would you eat?
Steak.
I like it.
Absolutely. I never get sick of eating steak.
How do you take it? How do you cook it?
Just I'll cut off what I want and I'll ride the rest home.
Love it.
Yeah, to quote what's his name, Dennis Leary.
Yeah. Along those lines, what's your guilty pleasure? Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. There really shouldn't be a pleasure, but I would say scrolling through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. That's something I do a little too much of, and it doesn't give me anything. So let me think of a better guilty pleasure. Better guilty pleasure for me, and a true guilty pleasure would be. Now, you know what? I'm going to stick with that. Scrolling through.
I think it's a good one.
Social media, because I got to be honest, like I do enjoy it. I do it a little too often, but that's the most honest answer if I'm being realistic. Yeah.
And then finally, when you're in the Philadelphia area, what was your favorite thing about the area?
You know, I didn't actually have an answer to that until last year. I was there for a friend's wedding. Mm-hmm. And when I was there, it was, a couple friends who had since moved away, made it out to his wedding. And for the first time ever, I got a chance to visit Phoenixville. One of my friends who was there to attend the wedding was meeting up with some of his friends, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to come with us to Phoenixville?" And I lived in Downingtown for about a year and a half, and only really ventured toward the Exton, Westchester area, and periodically into Philadelphia, but never went to Phoenixville, and I fell in love with it.
Phoenixville, great. Mm-hmm.
It was just such. I was like, you know what? If I had to move back to Pennsylvania, I would totally live in Phoenixville. It was beautiful. And then the other thing, and I know this is more than one thing, but the driving is really pretty, especially out in that area. Like there's these winding, scenic roads, a lot of great trees and foliage, and kind of little out of the way boroughs and towns that, they exist in Nebraska, but I don't think they have the exact same charm because they are a lot of times are far more spread out. And with Pennsylvania, and especially the Philly suburbs area at the very least, it's like they're much closer together. And so it's like you can just sort of like seamlessly weave from, one borough or one town to the next. And I always liked that. I never really had a lot of a reason to go toward, let's say, Wayne or Villanova, but I always liked the drive, and I think, and likewise, the drive to Phoenixville was very much the same. And then Phoenixville was like this little gem that I never expected.
I love it. Phoenixville was great.
Yeah.
Well, Aleks, I appreciate you hopping on. What is the best way if people are listening, they want to get in contact with you, join some of your training programs? What's the best way for people to contact you and reach out?
The best way definitely would be with my 9-minute challenge, because that will, if you get that, you'll also then, it'll be easier to contact me in a variety of other ways. I'm on all the major social media platforms, or most of them anyway. I don't have TikTok yet. I'm trying to hold out as long as I can, because I see that as like, it's like I'm addicted to crack with Facebook and heroin with Instagram. So why should I add, I don't know, meth or whatever with
whatever's next. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, definitely, if you get my 9-minute challenge, it will then put you into channels where it's a lot easier to reach out to me specifically if you want to. And like I said earlier, my 9-minute challenge has been very popular. A lot of people have really enjoyed it for helping to act kind of as an accelerant to their current training program. Some people use it as a standalone. Most people are using it as a supplement to help to speed up their regular training. And if you go to 9minutechallenge.com, it's the number 9minutechallenge.com. You can just get it. It's free, super easy to get a hold of and get started with. It's oriented around gait pattern movements that are focused on strength. So stuff like kettlebell loaded carries, crawling, things like that. Stuff that has a very, very short learning curve, but a really high yield, and also low impact on your nervous system fatigue. So it's easy to do it on a daily basis without burning out. That would be the best way for sure. And it'll kind of get you into my sphere, as I mentioned, and get you a better idea of what it is that I do, how I do it. And that way it'll also be the gate to open up to a wide variety of other things.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you hopping on, Aleks. Do you have any other closing thoughts before we close this out for good?
Yes, I would say, for good, that sounds ominous. Yeah, I would say no matter what, you're going to reach frustrations. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have plateaus. You're going to have things along the way that are going to be, that are going to make you want to quit. And I would definitely suggest that you realize, number one, that you don't yet know everything, and that there are sources out there that can help you. So do not give up. Keep training. And then the other thing would be to prioritize quality movement in your training, not at the expense of training hard. They should go together, like that MasterCard symbol, where it's like one circle and overlapping the other. But especially as you get older, you start to realize that just, sets and reps with strength training alone, it will take you a good portion of the way that you need to go, but it has a tendency to make you brittle if you're not also following it up with some good quality movement training. It's like if all you ever did was eat steak and potatoes and you had no fruits or vegetables, you would be sort of impoverished. And if all you had is fruits and vegetables and no steak and potatoes, you'd be weak. So you need both of them. Don't try to make it an either or proposition. Learn how to combine those two, and I think you'll probably find you have fewer frustrations and less wailing and gnashing of teeth in your training.
It's great advice. Everybody that's listening, you should take them up on that. But all right, Aleks, appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time out. It's been I've thoroughly enjoyed this. So thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.